When I reached the ripe old age of 12 years old and started attending middle school, a number of responsibilities were starting to be set on me. One of these was set on me by my sister, who began incessantly asking me to join the Model United Nations Club, of which she was a leader at the time. Now, a few notable things about me at this time were that one, I was adorable according to my mother, and two, I was extremely shy. I was mortified of even looking kids who were older than me in the eye. So the idea of even speaking in front of who knows how many every week scared me to death. So naturally, I refused every single time she asked. And I kept doing that for 3 years, by which point I was moving on to high school and she was moving on to college. And when that happened, I had a moment of reflection where I realized I had basically thrown away so many hours I could have spent with her by not joining the club. Now that, combined with the fact that I was moving on to high school where universities would start criticizing and looking at everything you did with your time, I decided to lock in. And with that decision, I finally joined the Model United Nations Club that year. Now, the first few meetings, I said absolutely nothing, and I just watched other delegates speaking, but eventually came my first conference here in Porto Alegre. And at that point, I would have to be forced to speak a number of times. When I rose to give my first speech at that conference, I completely bombed it. I sat back down, feeling like my point was okay, my argument was pretty good, and then immediately after that, another delegate rose, completely obliterated my argument, and I looked like a total idiot. Now, in my head, I imagined, okay, I've made a fool of myself, everyone in the room is going to start laughing at me. And then magically, when that didn't happen, I had a kind of eureka moment, and from that point, I started attending more conferences and participating more in MUN. And with each additional conference, I would speak more and more. I would raise my placard to speak more and more. And all of a sudden, I noticed I was even outside of conferences speaking with more confidence. When I walked, I no longer held my head low. When I spoke in groups of people I didn't know, I wasn't gagging on every word. And it felt like this huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Then, even outside of growth in my own confidence, MUN gave me growth in leadership. After a few successful debates, I applied for a chair position at Bramum, our country's largest MUN conference, and I got accepted. And from there, I learned all the values of leadership and communication and empathy and understanding. And even beyond being a chair, I eventually applied to become a part of the secretariat of Bramum, and that meant essentially helping to organize the entire conference. And that was a huge honor. But to this day, I think the most fulfilling part of my MUN journey is my position as the school's current president. Now in the shoes my sister were at the time, getting to watch and help so many kids grow in the way I did with NMUN, and that has by far been the most fulfilling part of my journey. Now, what I just told you is essentially a summary of my personal essay that I submitted through Common App. And I'd like to call attention to the start, where I said this whole journey got kicked off because I needed it for college, among other things. But this was a very important factor. And that push comes in many forms for many different people. But why I love the holistic college admissions process so much is because I believe that initial thought challenges so many people around the world to challenge themselves, to leave their comfort zones, to lose that fear of making mistakes. And oftentimes these things all come in the same package. This can even be echoed in a lot of universities' own websites and the prompts that they ask students to fill out. We have here Vanderbilt's supplemental essay prompt, where they specifically ask students to talk about this same process of daring to step outside of your comfort zone and grow from that. And I think this happens a lot because most of the universities that require holistic admissions processes want people who are willing to grow multilaterally. These are liberal arts education colleges in most cases, and they want students who have grown not only academically, but have grown in personality. And I really love the growth that that sets on the students that take on this process. But a lot of criticism I hear about this process is that oftentimes these application processes require their students to be jack of all trades and still master of all of them. There are people that say, if you want to get into a top university, you need to be the president of every club in your school. You need a 1500 SAT. You need to do X prestigious research opportunities and internships. When in reality, that isn't the case. Of course, a perfect student would most definitely be highly competitive, but in a lot of cases, these universities look for quality over quantity. For instance, in my own Common App, only had about 2 main extracurriculars that I spread out in different time zones throughout my extracurricular sheet. What this means is basically I focused on growing and achieving new positions within MUN and music. That's it. Second criticism I hear a lot is that universities always want trauma essays. This idea that in your essays, you need to essentially talk about some traumatic experience you've had and your growth and why that trauma essentially validates that growth. And I'm here to say that's also not true. As you guys just heard, I got accepted into UPenn with an essay that mentions no trauma. And in fact, I think a lot of universities are growing tired of this cookie cutter trauma essay because when you're applying, you want to stand out. If everybody's doing these trauma essays, that's not what you're doing. And finally, kind of in tandem with that idea of jack of all trades I mentioned earlier, it's that these admissions processes force applicants to waste so much of their time throughout high school focusing on building good resumes for these colleges. But that's where I say mindset comes in. I'm going to explore kind of the two extremes to which people think about this idea that everything someone does in high school, whether for extracurriculars, for advanced classes, anything of the sort, is either a complete sacrifice of time or it adds to what would have already been your growth. So someone who looks at it this way as a sacrifice basically just commits to, in freshman year, the activities that they think will look the best to universities. And they don't really consider what they might have a passion for or what they might like in that first year. And what happens is they decide to stick with it because that's what looks good for university. And they slog through 4 years of high school. And by the time they get to college, they haven't really explored their passions and explored themselves to know how to grow further in college. Meanwhile, someone focused on exploration and discovering their passions is going to be exploring a breadth of extracurricular activities, but dropping the ones they don't like and going in depth in later years on those they do. For instance, when I started freshman year, I was doing basketball and I was a member of the sustainability club, and these things would have looked pretty good on my application, shows variety, but I didn't like them. And that comes off a lot in your writing as well. When you choose something you have passion in and you stick with it, when you start writing about these things, you'll notice it's a lot easier to write about something you have passion in than pretending you do. Now, what I've heard from a lot of college counselors and students from some pretty good universities is that the kind of person that essentially sacrifices all of their time during high school to meet that goal, they're going in it with the mindset that, okay, I've done all this work for this university, my work is done. I got accepted, I'm here, when that couldn't be further from the truth. University hits hard, especially top universities, and it's at this point that the demanding environment combines with this lack of motivation and feeling of accomplishment that often leaves these students without a sense of direction, struggling to get by. Meanwhile, the student who decided to use their time to explore their passions and discover what they truly enjoy doing with their time, even outside of the professional realm, they get to university and they begin exploring those passions further and growing further in these universities. Again, most of these are liberal arts education universities. They don't want students to just pass their classes. They want them to thrive and add to the community through clubs, through engagement services. And so this is the kind of student that would already know how they're going to help the university in that way, and that's why they look for that. So to kind of cap this off, remember this. If you're a student in the process of applying to holistic admissions process colleges, it's that the need to do something for your college application can always be the push for you to do that, but it should never be the entire reason why you stick with that extracurricular activity. You will be way better off in life knowing exactly what it is you want to pursue, like I said, even outside of the professional realm, because you will have a better use of your time once you get to college. And it's a lot easier to write your essays that way. Thank you.